It all started with one phrase. I hold in my hand a list of 205, a list of names that were made known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, who nevertheless are shaping policy in the State Department. These were the words of Senator John McCarthy in 1950. This soundbite of history led to the biggest political witch hunt ever witnessed in America against communists and all others regarded to have radical beliefs. But the sentiments of this witch hunt started long before this list was ever made. In November 1917, the Bolsheviks, some Russian communists under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, seized control of Russia, sparking fears throughout the rest of the world. America was no different. Afraid of its recent influx of immigrants from the East, that these were also bringing these radical beliefs with them, disturbances spread across America, bombs went off, and in one instant killed 10 people in a church in Massachusetts. After these disturbances, tens of thousands of immigrants suspected of having these radical beliefs were rounded up in a single purge carried out by J. Edgar Hoover. Thousands were held without trial. Evidence against them was often flimsy. In 1950, McCarthy seized his chance and took the reins of this anti-communist hysteria that was sweeping the nation. Under McCarthy, over 10,000 people lost their jobs. Hundreds of innocent people were imprisoned on the grounds of their political beliefs. This in a country that advocates freedom and democracy around the world. But McCarthy was unstoppable. Politicians dared not criticise him. He had both political and public support, as well as the support of the FBI, which he used as Hitler used his SS and SA. The FBI broke up political meetings, were engaged in a number of illegal activities, including wiretaps and harassment, and kept files on every single suspected communist sympathiser. Blacklists were drew up so that no communist could get work anywhere in America. Anyone who criticised McCarthy was ruthlessly victimised. So these are the un-Americans. These men and women who were brave enough to oppose McCarthy, who are both the victims and the heroes of this tragic tale. Those who refused to give up their beliefs, those unwilling to surrender in the battle for freedom against McCarthy's anti-communist crusade, those who relentlessly fought for the truth. These are the un-Americans. As James Larkin stated at his trial, and torture judged as a necessity in this war on terror, there may come a time when we need to stand up and be counted, stand up and be un-Americans.
Any questions for Anthony about the topic of the subject? James? Oh, sorry, Alex.
Did those
Sorry,
sure.
Period of history in the Cold War between 1957 and 1979 between the Americans and the Russians. It all started in World War I when the Germans developed the V-2 rocket, which had to go into orbit into space before it landed on its target. After the war, it was invented by Werner von Braun, this guy who was an SS party member. And after the war, when the Germans were defeated and the Americans and Russians came in, the Americans recruited him for their rocket program so he could escape war crime trials. So the new knowledge that was acquired by the Americans and Russians went into ballistic missiles for like nuclear warfare. But in 1957, the R-7 rocket was developed by Russian scientists, and on the October the 4th, 1957, the R-7 rocket was sent into space, carrying a special cargo. This, the first satellite, Sputnik 1. It travelled at 18,000 miles per hour and circled the Earth every 96 minutes. And on January 31st, 1957, it was sent into space carrying the first American satellite. 2 years later, in January 1960, the Americans sent their own island to space, Han the chimpanzee, who actually survived this mission. So the next step was to send a human into space. So the Mercury 7 project was set up by the Americans. However, on 12th of April 1967, this guy, Yuri Gagarin, went to the space. He was a Russian astronaut. The Americans sent Alan Shepard into space to counteract this on his spaceship Freedom 7. On the 25th of May, JF Kennedy told Congress that the US should commit itself to landing a man on the moon and returning him to Earth safely before the end of the decade. Most scientists thought he was mad and this was impossible. The Russians also gained new achievements by four-day, 2-hour orbit, the first woman in space, and in 1965 the first space flight. On July 16, 1969, the Jupiter 5 rocket was in Cape Canaveral, carrying these three men, Mission Commander Neil Armstrong, pilot Buzz Aldrin and pilot Mike Collins. On July 16, 1967, the rocket, the Saturn V, set off for space.
But I thought I'd focus my speech on the issue of racism in American society and the question of what is racism and how it's affected this, the society over the course of American history. Right, well, first of all, I think many historians will agree that racism originated from the slave trade. We can't forget that America and the American economy, what it is today, is built on the back of slave labour. And slave labour was only sort of possible with people being able... It's a very antiquated mentality, but it's the sort of superiority over, over the other people. And that's how they come to exploit them. Now, whereas in most of the rest of the world, as it modernised and ideas became more liberal, racism began to, on a mass scale, began to die out. But America had more of a problem, and this can easily be seen through the fact that they had the Civil War. Now, the Civil War between the Confederacy and the Union being led by Lincoln.
Right.
What?
Oh, go on.
Anyway, the Union being led by Lincoln and the Confederacy by the likes of E. Lee and Thomas Jackson. This also, well, over the idea of slavery and the fact that the South wanted to keep slavery, whereas the North wanted it abandoned or outlawed, which it eventually was. But the most important thing about the Civil War is the fact that it highlighted the North-South divide. You've got, and this remains today, this is one of the biggest points with racism today, is the fact that we see most of it in America being based around the southern states rather than the north, which is more liberal. Now, this, well, after it was outlawed, it remained, it was still prevalent in the southern states, and in the mentality in the whole, and this can be seen through the formation of such groups as the KKK. Now, the KKK throughout the early 20th century was widely accepted, and it appeared, though, around 1866, created by veterans of the Confederate Army. And it didn't just advocate white supremacy, it advocated the supremacy of the sort of white race. It was very sort of Nazistic. But the problem with it was that, as I say, it was widely accepted. But again, it sort of died out later on. But it has been said, he took the resentment to the white people and turned it against them, because it gave an open forum for the world to see, with the